Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Social Housing Roundtable, the last full roundtable of the year. No, next week we're doing a bit of a Christmas quiz wrap-up, but it's great to have a topic we've been talking about for a fair old while now actually reaching the roundtable. So it's lovely to have Lynn Nichols, Stephen McIntyre and Jabeen Plummer with me. I'll leave them to do their own introductions very shortly, but to those who don't know me by now, my name is Matthew Baird. I am a social housing recruiter. I've been doing it for over 12 years now. I have specialised in anything and everything attached to the social housing sector, really, and I've completely fell in love with it. But the Social Housing Roundtable was something that got set up during the lockdowns to bring people together who don't always have a voice at conferences, who don't always have, the same faces that you see when you go to events, to bring people together to have genuine, honest, authentic conversations about any and every topic that we can bring. And I'd like to think that over the 45 sessions we've done this year, we've been able to do that. So very glad to bring LGBTQIA+ to the table today. So I know Stephen's going to start us off today, but Stephen, Lynn and Jabeen, would you just like to briefly introduce yourselves before we start? So Stephen, I'll pass over to you.
Yes, thank you, Matt. And thank you so much for having me here today. And thanks to everybody for your time. My name is Stephen McIntyre. My pronouns are he and him. And I'm the Chief Exec of Stonewall Housing. And Stonewall Housing is an organisation that helps LGBTQ+ people who are homeless or at risk of homelessness. And I've been here now for 3.5 years. So I've got some really lovely insights into our work to share with you today. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much. Lynn, over to you.
I am Lynn Nichols, pronouns she, her. I've worked in the housing sector for 20+ years. I know I look young, but thank you. And I've worked there for quite a while, but I also have done, I'm the CEO or the chair, whichever way you want to put it, of First Brick Housing, which is trying to build LGBTQ+ housing for LGBTQ+ people. So I'm here to talk a little bit about that. And I also sit on the House Proud Pledge Board.
Fantastic. And Jabeen.
Good morning. My name is Jabeen Plummer, pronouns she, her. I'm here today in my capacity as co-chair of House Proud, which is a network for LGBTQ+ staff working in social housing. I've got a background similar to Lynn of over 20 years in the sector, and more recently have been working in the private sector looking at developing digital solutions. So yeah, that's me today.
Fantastic. Lovely. Genuinely really grateful to all three of you for being here today and having a very kind of broad look at the wider topics we're trying to cover today. So Stephen, I'm going to pass over to you to introduce today's topic. If anyone would like to introduce themselves, please feel free to do so in the chat function. Ask questions as we go along. Questions are very, very welcome, and we look forward to hearing from you all today. So Stephen, over to you.
Yes, thank you. So today we're going to look at LGBTQ+ inclusion within social housing. And one of the things that I get asked very often when I'm out and about talking about Stonewall Housing and the work that we do is, why do we need to have this focus on LGBTQ+ people? Surely LGBTQ+ people can get services from other social housing organisations. Why don't they, for example, go to shelter whenever they need some advice and advocacy around housing or homelessness? Why is it that we have to have this particular focus? And one of the things that people think about is, surely things are so much better now for LGBTQ+ people than they were before. And that's very true. That is absolutely true, that things are better. For example, you'll know that we are now able to get married, even in Northern Ireland, where I'm from. It took them a little bit of a while to catch up. But even in Northern Ireland now, we can get married, we can adopt children. Things are very different for LGBTQ+ people. But also we have to look at what life is like for LGBTQ+ people in general. And unfortunately, although we've had these really lovely strides forward around legislation, day to day, LGBTQ+ people are still experiencing discrimination and oppression. And I want to tell you a little bit. I don't want to be too much of a kind of downheartedness around this, but I do want to tell you some of the stats around the experience of LGBTQ+ people at the minute. So we're talking here about LGBTQ+ people in the UK in 2023. So we're talking about right now. And very sadly, LGBTQ+ people are overrepresented in housing and homelessness stats. So the most recent information we've got is from the census that was done. Was that last year or even the year before? And the information is that somewhere around 6% of the population are LGBTQ plus, something like that. But when we look at our stats for LGBTQ plus people who are homeless, we're looking at something like 24% of the population. Now, AKT did, our partners at AKT did a study that looked at young people 16 to 25, and they find that 24% of homelessness in that age group are LGBTQ plus. There are some international studies that look across all age groups, and what we estimate there is that somewhere between 20 and 40% of LGBTQ plus people, of homeless people, excuse me, are LGBTQ plus. So in the UK, that means somewhere between 64,000 and 128,000 people. And just to put that into perspective, every year at Stonewall Housing, we work with about 2,400 people. So we're really only scratching the surface of this level of need. The other stat that we point to when we're thinking about life in the UK for LGBTQ plus people is hate crime. And very sadly, hate crime is on the rise, and it's increased significantly over the last few years. 1 in 5 LGBTQ plus people have experienced a hate crime. 1 in 5 of us, you know, like that's unbelievable. And you only have to look at the news to see the stories that you might have heard about those 2 young women who were forced to kiss. They were on a night bus on the way home from a night out, and they were forced to kiss by people on the bus. And then they were beat up so badly that they had to go to hospital. And that was just because they were gay. There was also a young man who on the South Bank, now this is going back a couple of years, but on the South Bank, he was walking home from a night out, and his attackers thought he was gay. He wasn't gay, but they thought he was gay, and they killed him on the way home from his night out. This is serious, the amount of crime that LGBTQ plus people are experiencing. 68% of LGBTQ plus people do not hold their partner's hand in public. And they do that because of fear of attack from people on the street. Now, I'm talking about people like me. So I've been with my partner for 14 years. I'm the chief executive of an LGBTQ plus organization. I'm out and I'm a member of the London Gay Men's Chorus. Like, I'm super gay, right? But I don't hold his hand. And it's not because we don't want to hold hands. We are the type of couple that want to, but we don't do it because it's not safe, And we know that if we were to do that, we would be more likely to be attacked or discriminated against because of who we are. 1 in 8 of us in the UK, now this is shocking and you might not believe it, but it's true. 1 in 8 of us have been attacked at work simply because we're LGBTQ plus. 1 in 8 of us, right? Now imagine you being at work and getting attacked just because of who you are. It's shocking, absolutely shocking. But for me, the most shocking statistic of all is that 10% of people in the UK think that LGBTQ plus people are a danger to other people. 10%. Do you know how many people that is? 6 million people across the UK think that we are dangerous just because we're LGBTQ plus. And so I tell you these stats not to kind of bring you down on a Tuesday morning, but to really illustrate what real life is like for LGBTQ plus people. And then as we start to think now about social housing and think about, right, okay, well, what does this mean for us? One of the things that I think about is the data around LGBTQ plus people in the sector. So I've set up a little poll that I'm hoping you're going to help with, Matt. And this is just a poll just to help us in our thinking and help us in our conversation. So if everybody could answer this, please. Do you know how many of your residents or customers or clients or whatever language you use, and how many of your staff are LGBTQ plus? And if you can just answer quickly, that would be really helpful. I'm going to answer, and the answer to my answer is yes. Because
it is fully anonymous, so we'll just let people know.
Yeah. Anonymous answer. It's really just to help us with the conversation. But the answer at Stonewall Housing is yes, and that's because all of our staff are LGBTQ plus. and all of our service users are LGBTQ+, so it's quite easy for us. But very often, the answer to this question is either no or unsure. And the reason that I highlight this is because why on earth is it that we don't know whether our service users or our staff are LGBTQ+? Very often it's because people don't tell us, and they don't tell us because of fear of discrimination. And so it's our job in the sector to say, look, if you are able to be your whole authentic self when you're with us, when you work here, or if you live with us, you can be yourself, and do not worry because you will not face discrimination as a result. So that's just,
I know there'll be a question that will pop
context.
up. I'm just getting ahead of it before it gets asked, which has always been, do you feel we need to know? And that's always been kind of the opposite side of that question, which is, I think it's worth knowing if you're actually going to do something to put in support mechanisms for those who need it.
Yeah.
But I think too often, sometimes people do ask, but then are just asking because then they've got that data somewhere.
Yeah.
And I imagine both are just as infuriating as each other for you.
Yeah. If we're asking the question, and one of our members of staff or one of our residents says to us, why do you need to know this? You know, why do you need to know this information? We have to be able to answer that, right? And one of the things, especially if you're working with older people, older LGBTQ+ people remember what it's like. When we were asked whether we were LGBTQ+, it was in order that we could be discriminated against. That's why they were asking the question. Banks wouldn't give us mortgages because they were concerned about HIV and AIDS, and they were worried that we wouldn't be able to pay back our mortgages. Insurance companies wouldn't insure us because we were LGBTQ+. And again, we were seen as high risk. And so we have to demonstrate to people the reason we want this information is so that we can make sure that our services are tailored to you. We're going to take that information and we're going to use it to make sure that LGBTQ+ people are included, are part of the... Oh my gosh, did you hear that? That's the loudest thunder I've ever heard in my life. It's gone dark here and it's thundering. But to make sure that LGBTQ+ people are included and are able to be their true authentic self, whether they're our service users or whether they're our staff.
Fantastic. I mean, I'm going to pass to Jabina, who I know had a point on this, and then it's lovely because it's you taking over. Thank you, Steve, for that really harrowing statistics in general there. And I really appreciate kind of that wider helicopter view. Jabina, I'm going to pass over to you.
Thank you so much. And then just to kind of pick up on that last point about why is it relevant, and I think in housing specifically, that's a very, very important question. As I said in the introduction, I've worked in housing for over 20 years, and for all of that time, there's been a conversation around what data we have about our residents, particularly around sexuality. When I was a housing officer in the earlier days, I felt uncomfortable asking people what their sexuality was because I wasn't sure why I needed to know. It felt very intrusive, felt very personal. It felt like you're asking somebody about who they sleep with, which feels inappropriate in a work context. But just picking up on what Stephen has shared in terms of what someone's sexuality therefore means about their life, how they're treated in the community, and what impact it has on their experience in our properties is why we need to ask. Recently, I attended a homelessness impact forum from the Centre for Homelessness Impact, and the number one cause of homelessness is relationship breakdown. And what you find with the community is that is one of the key reasons why they are so much more susceptible to both homelessness, because they don't have that family support network, somewhere to live, and hate crime. So these things are very important. And we've also done some research, we being House Proud, into those that the homelessness and hate crime are extreme examples, but you also have sort of day-to-day challenges with members of the community in their homes. For example, having to sort of hide indications of their sexuality when operatives come to the property, or especially for trans members of the trans community who are at different stages in their transition, having a lot of challenges interacting with staff and being able to be treated in the way that they want to be. So I think it's so important when we're talking about these kind of issues to be very clear about why we're doing it. There's a sense of fatigue and you know, statements thrown around like, oh, you know, back in the day it used to be PC gone mad, and now it's, you know, woke culture, which I hate with all of my soul. Stay woke. But the thing is, so it makes you feel as though it's just another, you know, eye roll situation, but actually these things have a real impact. And for us in social housing, we've made a commitment to, for a number of things. One, to have a workforce that represents the communities that we serve. And for those communities that we serve, who are by definition the most vulnerable members of our community, to treat them with respect, with dignity, and to provide them with, you know, safety and accommodation. So I wanted to, my contribution to this conversation is around the importance of staff networks. So as I said at the beginning, I represent House Proud, which is a national network for LGBTQ staff working in social housing. And I wanted to encourage organizations to invest in these employee network groups and to understand the value that you can get from them. So there's a few things that, by investing in your employee network groups, you know, the value that you can get. So first of all, diversity and representation. We would expect some of our workforce to represent our communities, and therefore by engaging with those members of staff, you're able to get a voice and some representation, providing support and safe spaces. For when you go to work, it doesn't stop you from, you know, being gay or having those experiences that broader members of the community do. And so as an employer, you can support those staff as well as gaining insight into how you can provide that support for your residents. By extension, builds awareness, builds education and understanding about the issues facing those communities. And I guess at a more strategic level can really help to influence policy and decision making. One of the things that can be challenging when we're talking about resident inclusion, about getting residents to be involved in those more strategic decisions, the challenge can be a skills gap and being able to kind of translate what their experiences are into policy. And so when you have staff that can relate and that have that sort of level of lived experience, whilst also having an expertise, that can help to bridge that gap for developing policy. A few more things. Having an organisation that very actively invests in their staff and supporting their staff attracts talent. It attracts, you know, these days we are very much more concerned. We talk about young people, but I think it's across the board. I think all of us are getting to a point where we want to do work that is meaningful. We want to work for organisations that are going to care about those things. It used to be an optional extra, but I think it's very much more a necessity, even for my own personal well-being, is to be working for an organisation that actually cares about those things. And I think it helps us to not only comply with the increased legislation that we have in social housing as it pertains to how we engage with our residents, but to go beyond that and to be able to really give services and an experience for our staff that is best practice. So I'm a massive, and Lynn has put in the link of how to join the House Proud network, but I'm a big fan of both leveraging those networks and seeing how we can support each other, be able to even like give advice and guidance, best practice. Things are changing all the time within our community, so leveraging that sense of an ecosystem and everyone kind of contributing. Yeah, that's.
No, and I really appreciate it. I think there's a lot there that's I think sometimes it's very easy just to, and I think both what Stephen and Jabin have touched on there, is very easy to go, oh, well, yeah, but, you know, LGBTQ is part of society now. And actually, what's clear is the more you deep dive into it, it isn't for a lot of people. They still wish it wasn't. As you said, 6 million people there, Stephen, but also, you know, going back to Jabin's point there, having an inclusive space, particularly for young people, if they know there's a community like that, regardless of whether they're a part of it, they'll see that as being a more inclusive organization, and it matters to a lot of people now. And it has, culture is changing. I think it is unfortunately becoming more divided. But for those that, you know, if you're trying to breed a culture of inclusivity, then it is something that you need to have in place. Lynn, I'm going to bring you in. Thank you for being patient for a few of the areas you're going to bring to the table today. So lovely to have you with us.
Thank you. It's been great to hear from Stephen and Jabin. Just to pick up from Stephen's points earlier, your staff who are LGBT plus have had a roller coaster of a year. It's been challenging, specifically for the trans and non-binary community. And I just want to spend a minute just to think about it. For the past more than 18 months, there's been a negative article about trans and non-binary people every Sunday in the national press. That has seen an increase in hate crime that is exponential for the trans and non-binary community. It has meant that the public perception of trans and non-binary people has shifted, and in a very negative fashion. But it has meant for day-to-day life that we've lost people. So we have lost trans and non-binary people who have unalived themselves because of the rhetoric that's out there. This affects the community. And there's been the increase in hate crime. So in Clapham, just near where I live, there's been various people very recently assaulted after leaving nightclubs in the local area, which used to be a very safe area. There's been a very big increase through. Now, that all means that for your staff, actually, you need to acknowledge that as an organisation because you have a duty of care. So there's the duty of care point of view, and I think that sometimes gets forgotten. Because there has been such a rise in rights that it's seen as being, it's all okay for everybody. But there is the duty of care that you have to have for your staff. Also, coupled with, from what Jabin was saying about, we have to make sure that our boards represent our communities. Now, the census for the first time included LGBT plus identities. It didn't include them before. And this means for the first time you've got data, so you can see for your area what is the proportion of LGBT people in your area. We have a lack of representation of LGBT people in board and senior positions, and we have a lack of, especially if you look at the full diversity of the LGBT spectrum. And LGBT people come from all different ethnicities, all different cultures and religions. We can have a disability or not. We are not just one thing. We can have a faith or not. And I think that's often forgotten, and we just focus on one area. Now, the power of staff networks can be the most amazing things. I started my first one up 20 years ago at Southwark Council, long before staff networks were an actual thing, and have continued to have staff networks wherever I've gone. But the staff networks have to work for you and your organisation. They have to reflect you and how you work and where you are on a journey. Because with ED&I, it is a journey, and it's being really honest where you are and where you're trying to get to. But staff networks that work the best are the ones that have the buy-in from all levels of the organisation, from senior leadership, but they also reflect where the organisation is and wants to get to and has a clear purpose. So for some organisations, it might actually be what's needed is a social group. For others, it might be a group that actually wants to actively change something. But if you don't have a shared language across your organisation, it makes it difficult to serve our customers that are LGBT+. Because if you don't have that shared knowledge, it makes it difficult to understand the needs of the LGBT+ community. So by having staff networks, it's part of the equation. And if you're a small organisation, one of the beauties of House Proud, which